While we're waiting and sort of off the record, do you want to talk any more? I'm just going to take a minute. This price-earnings ratio thing, it's sort of interesting just to sort of learn it for the future. And I sort of gather that most of us are beginning to get it. But if you have a question about it, we could take a quick question and talk about price-earnings ratio. One subtlety to the thing is they generally traded on what your expected earnings are this year, not what they really were last year. And in the Wall Street Journal, they print the multiple. Right next to your stock price, they print what the ratio is between today's price and last year's earnings. But actually what most analysts use is a slightly different number that represents their estimate of this year's, because they don't really care about last year. They really care about what's going to happen today and in the future. The past is history to them. But the journal can't print every analyst's estimate, so the journal just prints the multiple of last year's earnings divided into this year's share price. So for example, on Williams-Sonoma it says 25. That's a very high multiple, PE multiple, 25 times last year's earnings. One reason it's so high is they're expecting them to do a lot better this year. So maybe it's really only 15 times this year's expected earnings, which would be a little more normal. And when they say Walmart has a ratio of 30 times last year's earnings, that's really a ratio of about 20 times this year's expected earnings, because this year's are usually bigger than last year's, right? You're supposed to earn more every year. So to get to $10, let's say, on a given stock price, 20 times last year's earnings or 15 times this year's earnings may both equal $10, because this year's earnings are supposed to be bigger. Therefore, you can multiply by a slightly smaller factor. It's interesting because we use sort of the same factors in our analysis of our projections. We apply a factor, and that's all that stock prices are based on, is some factor that's priced times a ratio times the earnings. So this little subtlety is just the way they talk about it in the trade is they go, are you talking trailing earnings or current estimate? And trailing earnings is what they print in the journal, because that's a fact. They know what that is. It's a hard number they can print, where the current year's estimate is sort of an ambiguous thing. The different analysts have different opinions. Like right now, the estimate on the street for the sharper image is 55 to 60 cents is their estimate for us this year, versus last year's 70 cents. So one reason our multiple is particularly low, one reason among other reasons, is that it's 8 times last year's earnings, but that's about 12 times this year's estimate, or 10 times this year's estimate. If we earn 55 cents, 10 times 55 is 550, and we've been trading around 550. So they're actually trading us about 9 to 10 times this year's estimate. Still pathetically low, but it's not quite as bad as 8. But it's sort of 6 to 1 half. They're both such low numbers. All right, good work, Joe. Excellent. Okay, let's continue. We'll conclude in about 10 or 15 minutes. Why is it so important to change these things that we've talked about? Expenses, income, price of our stock. Why is it so important to change these things? And can we change them? I mean, there's really two really basic questions there. How important is this? And what's the likelihood we can really successfully do it? First of all, let's realize that I'm going to argue that no matter how difficult the situation is, we must learn to do this because of a number of reasons. The most difficult situation usually involves a human emotion. You know, it's so much easier, not that Sandra would agree with me, but it might be easier for her to say, it's easier to specify a different quality of supply and switch our order than it is to tell a particular employee or associate that works with you that they're not doing the work the way you'd like it done, and here's how I'd like to see it changed. That's harder to do because it's a human emotion. And it's very difficult for anyone to tell another human being that we need to see something changed. And yet, in a way, it's also very uplifting because the result, when you help that person to be successful at what they're doing by giving them a new direction or a new expectation or a different responsibility or less responsibility, the result is pretty soon you've managed to make them successful. And if they're successful, then you feel good about yourself, your team feels good, your group feels good, your department's working well, and generally it's a very fulfilling, rewarding experience. It might seem a little difficult at first, but the net result is always a positive one. They don't like disappointing you. And it really is your responsibility as a manager. I mean, that's why you're a manager in this company, is to do that, to exercise your responsibility as a manager and to get that result. Because it benefits you, certainly. It benefits the entire company in the long run, because it ultimately benefits the growth of the company, because there will be growth if there is successful planning that leads to this earnings that we've been talking about through this entire meeting. I mean, it's really that simple. Your management of those people and those things and those supplies and that time and the flow of events every day, your management of that is going to translate into those earnings, and that's going to let the company grow. And that growth is what creates the opportunity that we have all appreciated and enjoyed. Salary increases, we've certainly had those, and that's all been driven by our earnings growth. Bonuses and profit sharing. We have profit sharing in this company for everyone that's been here a certain amount of time. And we have bonuses for people at the management level and above, especially in the corporate office, where we're not on a commission or a store bonus structure, but we're on a corporate bonus program. And those bonuses are only driven by the earnings being greater this year than last year. If the earnings are less, there is no bonus. So that's a direct hit to each of our personal financial pocketbooks if we don't get the result that we're capable of getting. Stock option growth. All of us have stock options or will be entitled to stock options for joining the company. And it's so interesting to work out some numbers on stock options. You can go crazy with these numbers. For example, I worked out a few. If somebody just had 200 options to purchase Sharper Image stock that were worth $20 a share, that would be $4,000. It's not a huge amount, but none of us would object if I gave you a check for $4,000 at the end of the meeting. If it was 500 shares at $20 a share, that would be a $10,000 check. That would make your evening even brighter to go home with $10,000 extra dollars in your pocket. If it was 1,000 shares at a $20 profit on the stock, that works out to $20,000. How about if the stock was $50 a share? You know, a lot of these shares don't vest except over a number of years. You have to be here a certain number of years, and they vest a little bit each year. What if at the end of the vesting period, say 5 years from today, the stock was at $50 a share? Work out those same numbers again. 200 shares at $50, $10,000. 500 shares at $50, it's $25,000. If somebody had 1,000 shares and made $50, it's $50,000. If they were fortunate enough and had been with this company long enough, and through the growth and opportunity we had created, had risen to a high enough level to have 10,000 options or shares and made $50 on each share, it's $500,000. And you might say, $50 is out of the question. And yet I would point out that next year, the projection for the earnings of our company will probably be around $1 a share if we get the result that we could. And if we earned $1 a share, and if we were trading at a 30 or even a 20 times multiple, it would be a $20 stock at the end of next year. If it was trading at 30 times, it would be a $30 stock. And those are the same multiples that right now are being gotten by Walmart and Nordstrom. That could happen 14 months from today. So it isn't now the question at all that in 5 years this could be a $50 stock. In fact, it's almost, the odds are perhaps the other way, that if we do our job well, it'll be hard for it not to be a $50 stock in 5 years. So those are a lot of the reasons why, to me, it's so important that we exercise our responsibilities as managers to get that result. Because I want to see that growth for you and for me, for all of us, to have the opportunity to get salary increases, the bonuses, the profit sharing, the stock option growth, just the opportunity to advance in our own careers and get more responsibility. And most importantly, because the second part of that equation that makes up the ratio that's applied to our earnings to get the price of our stock, that price-earnings ratio, the second part of that, the first part is expectation of consistent earnings. The second part is how professional is our management. And the simple fact is that the analysts, the people who make up the price of our stock every day, they don't really believe that we have professional management. It's reflected in our stock price. I've been told personally, a number of times, I've been told by people who are analysts, who do trade our stock every day, that they don't believe that we have the professional management team that we need to go into the future. And they have told me that if we hired the professional managers, the professional store managers, the professional district managers, the professional regional managers, the professional accounting managers, the professional merchandising managers, the professional data processing managers, if we hired the right professional people, we would get a higher multiple. You know, Williams-Sonoma hired an outside president 2 or 3 years ago. He didn't know much about their business, but the price of the stock went up. He left 18 months later. They hired another professional manager. Price of the stock went up some more. Trades at 25 times earnings. The Gap hired a new merchant. As you may recall, the stock went to $80 a share. Never been higher in its life. It eventually dropped back to 30, but it's still trading at 17 times earnings. If we hired a new president, our stock price might go up. If we hired a new vice president of merchandising, the price would probably go up. If we hired a new vice president of any area, analysts would be impressed because they don't believe that we have the professional management to make this company consistently grow in the future. Now, these people don't know much about our business, admittedly. They really don't. I mean, they analyze the May Company and Bullock's and the Emporium and the Gap and Ann Taylor and Laura Ashley. They don't really know much about the SHRP image. But one thing they do sort of know is they do know that as we grow from a zero-size company to 100 million to a 200 million size company, they know that a lot of things take place. And they don't think that we really have the disciplines in place to control costs, for example. They don't think we have the discipline to control the personnel that work for us. These skills run across every company. It's not, they don't have to know much about the SHRP image to know when you have 1,000 people, if you can't control the hours they work, if you can't control how productive they are, if you can't manage their productivity, then you're going to have a result that's not as good as some other company where they've been doing that for 20 years. They don't think we have the personnel experience to phase out non-productive associates and to promote productive ones. They don't think we have the knowledge or the skills or the resolve to reassign somebody to where they could be successful. They don't believe that we can find enough unusual products to keep our company ahead of other people that are trying to compete with us. And there is plenty of competition out there. And more people every day are waking up to the fact that we have generated a tremendous sales volume. And so they are trying to understand what it is we do and copy what we're doing. Now, they don't really understand exactly what we're doing, and that's why no one's copied it. And quite frankly, the competition is no closer today than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. In fact, if anything, it may be further away because we have been willing over the years to sacrifice a certain amount of profit to make sure that we are in a position where we are virtually in control of our market. We are in the best locations. We are in many different prime locations. We're in the best shopping centers. We're in almost every fine shopping center in the United States right now. We're in the best financial districts. We have the premier catalog. We have the national reputation. It would take years, perhaps a decade, for anybody else, even if they started today, to build the same locations, the same reputation, the same catalog, the same following that we built. So we are virtually, right now, in a total control of our own destiny. The problem is the people who are analyzing us don't believe we're skilled enough to manage our own destiny. They don't believe that we can manage our margins, our merchandise margins. They don't believe that we can manage the leftover inventory that a 64, 62 store chain will create this Christmas. They don't believe that we can control the quality of our products or the distribution of those products. They don't believe that we can control the data processing needs or the distribution center needs of a $200 going on $300 million business. And so far, they've been right. They knew something when we reported that fourth quarter last year that told them somehow we were going to get ourselves into a problem. And they were absolutely correct. Maybe it was luck that they were correct. Maybe they just suspected something. Maybe they knew this happens to every company that grows that quickly. But they were right. Margins were down in the first half of this year. We didn't control our margins. Expenses were up. We took in, but personnel costs skyrocketed. So did supplies. So did telephone. In fact, every single expense in our company increased dramatically. Pick an expense area, and I would bet you that if we looked at it, you'd find it increased dramatically, regardless of what it was. You name it, it increased. Phone usage, attorney's fees, you name it, supplies, printing, everything went up. So we sit here today and we ask ourselves, this is a lot of sort of discouraging news and a small bit of encouraging news. I mean, we did complete the the highest volume 6 months we've ever had in our history. We just completed the second biggest volume, the biggest volume we've ever had. And we're about to complete probably the second highest earnings year we've ever had. And we are going to hit a new sales record and top 200 million of sales. And it is certainly true that the most important thing is our market position, our reputation, how it affects our future growth. That's a lot more important than our earnings in any given 6 months. So we're doing a lot of things right. And we can probably agree that we are here today, sitting in this room, listening to this, because we want to satisfy ourselves through an interesting, rewarding, productive job. First of all, we got to support ourselves. We'd like the income. But secondly, we'd like to enjoy what we're doing. We'd like to enjoy where we work. We'd like to enjoy what we're doing every day. We'd like to enjoy the people we work with. Have a nice desk, a nice office to work in. All those things are really important. To be with people we like is one of the most important. And I'll repeat, I've never imagined that I would enjoy being with a group of people that I work with today as much as I do. But I really do. And when I visit the stores, I feel the same way. It's a fantastic company right now with a wonderful group of people. And we really, I think, enjoy working with one another. So that part is very good. And we're really proud to tell people where we work. It's a lot of fun to say, I work at the SHRP Image, because people regard us with a certain awe and maybe jealousy, because we work for a company that has been extraordinarily successful. And of course, we like to keep having the other things that are just income items: raises, bonuses, profit sharing, stock growth. And we can have all that if we continue to grow, and that growth is measured by the earnings. And if we stop growing, then we will have a very difficult experience because we will have to face the contraction of everything we've done. We will stop adding stores. We will stop adding responsibility, and people will have no place to move up to. And that would be so discouraging because it has been so exciting to see the responsibilities that we have created that people can move up and into. And as we get to be a bigger company, more of those will be created if we have the growth that allows us to continue to expand. So there are plenty of reasons why it's very clear we want to do everything we can to make these earnings grow, and that the company grows, and that you continue to enjoy even more what you've been doing and to get rewarded for it. Can we really affect that? Can this group of people right here really affect what's going to happen the next 6 months and the next year? I mean, that is really the most important question. You know, we're a company